The Varnak Dominion had always viewed themselves as apex predators. Bred for war, built for domination, they had never known defeat across 3 centuries of conquest. Their empire sprawled across sectors, marked by smoldering planets and obedient client species. To them, Earth was nothing more than a rock orbiting a yellow star, inhabited by a species that lacked claws, fangs, or carapace. What the Varnaks saw was softness, diplomacy, empathy, negotiation. They mistook it for weakness. Despite multiple warnings from the Galactic Council, despite quiet historical records marked with redacted lines and unexplained anomalies, the Varnak pressed forward. To challenge Earth, they believed, would send a message. To break the Terrans publicly would shatter resistance across the galaxy. So they staged a broadcast. Across millions of screens, the Varnak's supreme warlord declared Earth guilty of arrogance, of pretending to be equal among true civilizations. He gave Earth 7 cycles to kneel or suffer the wrath of the Dominion. Earth's response was no response at all. Frustrated, the Varnak launched a preemptive strike. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't efficient. It was a demonstration. The colony on Calyx 9 was the target, populated mostly by civilians, scientists, and their families. 25 million souls. The Varnak fleet descended in formation, recording everything. They did not use lasers or plasma, they used firebombs, atmospheric scramblers, and kinetic rods that turned cities to craters. They wanted screams. They wanted submission. What they got was silence. The feed ran live for 12 standard hours. Not a single retaliation. Not a single missile. No threats. No diplomacy. Just death, and the Varnak basking in it, broadcasting triumph, spinning the silence as surrender. But Earth wasn't silent because it was defeated. It was silent because something ancient and dangerous had awakened. Humans have names for it. Cold rage. Calculated wrath. A stillness that comes before the storm. The kind of silence where the knife is already drawn, and the target doesn't even know it's been cut. The Varnak analysts reviewed Earth's response and found nothing. No military movement. No troop deployment. No mobilization. They laughed. Arrogant and blind, they declared Earth broken and turned their fleets elsewhere, assuming the job was done. What they didn't realize was that Earth hadn't stalled, it had recalibrated. Humanity had never sought to dominate stars. It had no hunger for empires. But it knew how to survive. It knew how to endure. And more importantly, it knew how to retaliate. In the darkest corners of Terran command bunkers, plans were not being made, they were being activated. Stored contingencies, rehearsed for centuries, compiled in dusty databanks marked only if provoked. Earth's war councils didn't react with emotion. They responded with mathematics. No cries for vengeance. No public outrage. Just grim, surgical assessment. Names were taken. Signals were tracked. Varnak's ships were followed without their knowledge. Linguists decrypted communications. Psychologists dissected cultural patterns. Xenotechnologists analyzed weapons systems and found the gaps. No message was returned. No threat delivered. Because humanity had already decided. There would be no war. Only punishment. Galactic analysts began noticing unusual behavior. Terran diplomats withdrew from interstellar summits. Human trade ships vanished from border zones. Earth's media went quiet. Stock markets paused. Spaceports locked down. It was as if the planet was collectively holding its breath. And the Varnak didn't notice. The first real sign came not with sound, but with absence. A Varnak military post near the edge of Sector 19 simply stopped transmitting. Investigators found nothing, no debris, no bodies, no black box. Just a barren asteroid field where once there had been orbital stations and fleets. The second disappearance followed 2 days later. Then the third. The Dominion assumed it was sabotage. Perhaps internal rebellion. They still didn't understand. The hunter had become the hunted. Inside Terran High Command, there were no speeches. No celebration. Just action. Retaliation was no longer a debate. It was a checklist. No vengeance. No rage. Only resolution. Across the stars, human operatives moved silently, setting beacons, marking targets, preparing the battlefield not for conquest, but for erasure. They weren't sending a message to the Varnak. They were delivering a verdict. Operation Ashfall was authorized with a single nod. No broadcast, no formal declaration. The mission was simple: make the Varnak regret ever speaking Earth's name. Within hours, Terran Command initiated full-spectrum counteraction. Civilian industries converted into wartime production with zero hesitation. AI war cores were rebooted, purged of peacetime limitations, and synchronized with orbital relays. Every ounce of human intellect, engineering, and rage was focused into the singular task of annihilating the Dominion's military capability. The initial strikes weren't large. They were precise. Varnak deep space refueling stations vanished first, taken offline by zero-EM strike pods. No radiation. No traces. Just the cold, inexplicable death of infrastructure. The next wave targeted FTL beacons, leaving vast portions of Varnak-controlled space blind and isolated. When Dominion vessels jumped to assist, they emerged into voids littered with cloaked mines designed by Terran think tanks for the singular purpose of ship liquefaction. Human fleets didn't approach directly. They didn't engage in traditional formations. They emerged behind planetary shadows, used gravitational slingshots to warp unpredictably, and treated spacetime as a weapon. Varnak command centers, usually buried deep beneath planetary crusts, were compromised without a single ground deployment. Subterranean sonic pulses, precisely calculated, collapsed those facilities inward, entombing entire chains of command in an instant. The humans never stepped foot on the soil. Black Ops units, enhanced with neural mapping and thermoptic armor, struck communication nexuses simultaneously across 9 sectors. The Dominion's attempt to respond died before the first command could be transmitted. Human AIs, bound by strategic killbox protocols, deployed adaptive cyber weapons capable of rewriting Varnak drone logic in seconds. Their fleets turned against them. Within minutes, entire ship groups self-destructed under false commands. The Varnak had always believed themselves superior due to their sheer physical prowess and aggressive culture. They'd never considered the possibility of an enemy that didn't care for honor, that never followed predictable doctrine, and that used silence as a spear. Terran doctrine wasn't built on strength, it was built on flaw exploitation and recursive attack evolution. Every Varnak maneuver became obsolete the moment it was deployed. Varnak attempts to regroup failed catastrophically. Relay buoys detonated upon activation. Safe zones were pre-mapped and pre-mined weeks in advance. Their attempts at flanking met empty sectors. And when they tried to retreat, they found their FTL cores mysteriously bricked. Terran infiltrators had already been among them, disguised, unnoticed, and waiting. At no point did Earth speak. They did not negotiate. They did not issue terms. They did not insult or threaten. They simply executed. The Dominion began using civilian vessels as shields, hoping human morality would slow them. It didn't. Terran AI flagged the tactic and bypassed it entirely, neutralizing the combatants with microscopic rail bursts that never touched non-combatants. Dominion leaders assumed this was luck. It wasn't. It was design. Earth's weapons weren't just precise, they were judgment incarnate. Entire Varnak moons used for supply staging were converted into tombs overnight. Satellites fell from orbit, gravity disrupted by localized mass drivers calibrated for orbital destabilization. Not a single Varnak escape transmission made it out of those systems. Within 5 days, the Varnak High War Council had lost 72% of its fleet strength. Their industrial hubs were non-functional. Their command structure fractured. Their soldiers were either dead, scattered, or isolated. Entire legions stopped receiving food. Training academies, once bustling, sat in the dark, systems fried, staff missing, data banks corrupted. All by remote actions, never requiring Terran presence. A captured Dominion cruiser was returned, not as a warning, but as a signal. It drifted silently into Varnak space, engines destroyed, with every crew member surgically sedated and tagged. The tags glowed faint blue, encoded with Earth's DNA strain, proof that they had been inside, touched nothing else, and let them live. The implication was clear. The humans were not retaliating. They were pruning. The galaxy watched, unable to look away. No one understood how Earth had mapped the Dominion's military networks so completely. No one knew how they'd struck with such coordination and speed. Whispers began to circulate in the diplomatic circles. Earth had always known. They had planned for this. And while other empires expanded and boasted, humans had prepared quietly, waiting for someone to cross the line. The Varnak had crossed it. And now, piece by piece, the humans were erasing them. The Dominion had expected resistance, even retribution. What they hadn't expected was a war they couldn't track, map, or predict. The human response moved like a virus, unseen, silent, and utterly devastating. Varnak war doctrine depended on overwhelming force and prideful presence, but none of their formations had answers for an enemy that didn't occupy territory or hold position. The humans didn't defend. They didn't seize ground. They dismantled. Within 2 weeks, the front no longer existed. There was no front line. No battle map. Terran units appeared behind strongholds before alerts could be triggered. Drop pods landed inside sealed bases, their descent masked by environmental mimicry. By the time alarms sounded, the personnel were dead and the infrastructure already compromised. Human teams vanished without a trace. No corpses, no trail, just static interference and failed security loops. In deep space, Varnak carriers fell prey to psychological tactics they didn't even recognize. Terran broadcasts weren't signals. They were pulses embedded with subliminal triggers that hijacked Varnak's sensory centers. Crew hallucinated voices, shadowy figures, phantom pain. Some self-terminated before a single shot was fired. Others abandoned ship mid-flight, ejected into vacuum under the belief they were escaping fire. Medical AI logged incidents as unknown psychological contamination. By the time an answer was formulated, the fleet was gone. Traditional combat rules no longer applied. The Dominion relied on chain-of-command structures, centralized authority, and glory-based leadership. Humans bypassed every link. They identified weak nodes, junior officers, support personnel, logistics overseers, and struck where morale could be cracked. Dozens of officers disappeared during transmission calls. Their implants were hacked and their neural patterns scrambled before extraction. Panic spread. The chain broke. Entire systems once deemed strategically critical were left intact but useless. Human forces didn't destroy everything, they disrupted precisely what mattered. Fuel control nodes, waste processors, gravity regulators. Bases became prisons without walls. Ships rotted in orbit, functional but abandoned, their crews dead from starvation or internal collapse. No combat required. Rumors infected Varnak ranks. Soldiers believed Earth had developed precognition. Some insisted Terran Marines could hear thoughts. Others claimed their dead commanders were being made to issue false orders that led to ambushes. The Dominion's iron discipline fractured under the weight of these fears. Paranoia flourished. Allies turned on each other. Communication breakdowns escalated into friendly fire. The fear was well earned. Earth's tactics evolved with each encounter. Patterns were logged, studied, and inverted. A successful Varnak maneuver was never effective twice. Human AI war cores adjusted in real time, rewriting tactical protocols on the fly. Fleets learned from failure not by trial, but by prediction. Every battle they entered was one they'd already simulated 1,000 ways. And they never fought fair. Even the terrain changed. Terran engineers deployed atmospheric conversion clouds that altered local conditions. Varnak troops found themselves choking on breathable air turned acidic, or blinded by sensor-absorbing fog that moved with unnatural precision. Combat suits failed in conditions designed specifically to exploit their material weaknesses. There was no luck, only deliberate, targeted manipulation. The psychological toll eclipsed physical losses. Human forces left behind no propaganda, only remnants. In one outpost, soldiers found an empty bunker filled with Terran rations and uniforms. In another, a wall covered in their own language read only, *. You still don't understand. *. The implication was cruelly simple. Humans weren't just killing them. They were teaching them. Captured soldiers returned with memories tampered beyond repair. Every interrogated survivor recalled a different battlefield, different outcomes, different sounds. Some insisted the humans spoke their native tongue. Others swore they never saw a face. One commander, recovered in a sealed pod, simply repeated the phrase, "We asked for it," until his mind collapsed. Despite mounting losses, Varnak High Command refused to fully retreat. Pride locked them in place. They attempted to rally their remaining fleets near the Helix Spine, hoping to draw humans into a final decisive clash. Earth's response wasn't to take the bait, but to erase the staging point entirely using an artificial gravitational collapse. A star destabilized, not with brute force, but through precision resonance, turning the system into a silent grave. Not a single human ship entered the area. Across the stars, silence became the new terror. Terran operations didn't announce arrival. They weren't detected. They weren't tracked. They simply occurred. The Dominion, once feared for their overwhelming presence, now trembled at shadows, afraid of every blinking signal, every piece of interference, every system glitch. The humans didn't fight wars. They rewrote them. The Dominion's surrender was inevitable, but they waited too long. By the time emissaries were dispatched, entire communication networks had gone dark. The War Council, reduced to half its members, finally attempted contact with Earth. Pleas for negotiations were transmitted in every known language, followed by full withdrawal announcements and declarations of unconditional surrender. There was no answer. Instead, Earth responded with a coordinated strike that leveled the Varnak Military Academy on Korath Prime. It was not a tactical target, it was symbolic. A monument to centuries of conquest and indoctrination, reduced to molten ruins in a 10-second orbital burn. Every broadcast channel carried a single message in Terran Standard, *. This is what surrender earns. *. The Dominion expected terms. What they received was extinction by sequence. No planetary bombardments. No population culling. Just quiet, thorough erasure. Energy grids disabled permanently. Oxygen processors reprogrammed to induce lethal atmospheric shifts. Water purification systems subtly corrupted. No immediate explosions, no visual horror, only systems failing one by one, and societies collapsing under invisible pressure. Messages from survivors flooded council channels. Cities went dark without warning. Agricultural domes decayed. Infrastructure crumbled in perfect, calculated silence. Earth didn't need to fire a second wave. The mechanisms had been set long before. Every defense point had been marked. Every planetary relay pre-infected. Earth had already moved on. The damage was just now unfolding. Varnak leadership tried to send envoys a second time, desperate for mercy. They were intercepted and returned inside sealed containment capsules, uninjured but stripped of rank insignias, identity tags, and voice. Their ability to speak had been medically disabled, permanently silenced. The implication was brutal and direct. Dialogue was not permitted. Internal rebellion fractured the Dominion faster than any battle ever had. Civil divisions erupted. Worlds previously bound by force or tradition began disavowing the War Council. Not to escape Terran wrath, but to preempt it. Governors sent declarations of neutrality into the void, unsure if anyone listened. Some systems enacted mass exile policies, hoping to demonstrate a purge of military elements. It made no difference. Earth had stopped distinguishing between targets. One by one, Varnak strongholds went silent. Not destroyed, emptied. Infrastructure intact, weapons systems untouched, but entirely abandoned. Drones recorded cities still running but void of life. Human operatives hadn't needed to kill, they had simply made it impossible to stay. What terrified the survivors wasn't destruction. It was the decision. Earth had clearly chosen not to kill more than necessary. Not out of mercy, but out of indifference. The Dominion was no longer a threat. They were an example. The message was no longer about retaliation. It had become precedent. Across the stars, other empires watched with mounting dread. Earth hadn't occupied a single system, hadn't annexed a single territory, hadn't claimed resources. There was no visible gain. Only loss. Only punishment. And in that void of ambition, other powers saw the real danger. Earth didn't want control. They wanted memory. And they were burning that memory into the bones of the galaxy. Human analysts compiled detailed psychological profiles on every surviving Varnak officer. Not to negotiate, but to ensure no one ever rallied again. Each survivor was tracked, neutralized, or surgically altered to remove leadership capabilities. Neural dampeners, personality wipes, or tactical isolation. No kill count. Just complete political sterilization. In some systems, Terran forces left behind nothing but beacons broadcasting a single phrase, asterisk. You begged for war. Asterisk. Those messages looped endlessly in Varnak dialects, across ruined cities, over empty star bases, into the vacuum where fleets once stood. Not to taunt, but to finalize judgment. Galactic lawmakers proposed emergency summits. None were attended by Earth. Diplomatic shuttles sent toward Sol never received docking instructions. Earth's silence had transformed into an immutable boundary. Cross it, and the consequences would be absolute. The Varnak weren't just beaten, they were erased from relevance. Their empire, once the most feared, now existed only as a warning. Humanity's final action wasn't a weapon, but a lock. A self-propagating AI virus designed to permanently sever Varnak systems from interstellar channels. Their culture, language, and data archives were sealed inside encrypted vaults, accessible only by Terran command. The Varnak would never again speak to the stars unless Earth allowed it. This was not mercy. This was sentencing. The Varnak legacy did not end in fire. It ended in silence. What once stood as a sprawling war civilization now lingered in fragments, nameless ships drifting without crew, hollow cities echoing with wind, archives overwritten by blank code. Nothing remained that could rise again. Earth had not just crushed a threat, it had removed the concept of the Dominion from galactic relevance. It was no longer feared, hated, or even discussed. It was absent. Survivors, scattered and unarmed, were monitored but untouched. No interference followed. Earth no longer needed to act. Every Varnak born after that war inherited a world where history was fractured, where pride was a ghost, and where the memory of resistance was no longer passed down, but avoided. No monuments were built. No names were honored. There was nothing left to honor. Galactic records began using passive tense when referencing the conflict. Not, Earth defeated the Dominion, but, the Dominion was lost. Language adapted to reflect the truth. This was not a war of equals. It was a reckoning. Political scholars quietly revised doctrine. Military strategists deleted centuries of combat models. Across hundreds of systems, unspoken rules emerged. Earth would not be provoked. Earth would not be analyzed. Earth would not be challenged. Earth, for its part, expanded nothing. No new colonies appeared. No territory changed hands. Trade resumed slowly, but no embassies were built. The solar system became a closed shell, functioning, responsive, but entirely insular. Observers noted strange orbital constructs beyond Neptune, layered in silence. Not weapons, not ships, just presence. Watching. Waiting. Other civilizations took the lesson to heart. Military academies revised ethics courses. Youth programs in frontier worlds taught caution where once they taught conquest. Veterans who had seen the war firsthand refused to speak of it. Not out of trauma, but reverence. The kind reserved not for enemies, but for forces of nature. Earth had become a singularity in the galactic psyche, a species capable of extinction without expansion, of dominance without occupation. Diplomats began calling it the Void Doctrine. A policy of non-engagement with Sol and its subsidiaries, enforced not by treaties but by fear. Patrols were rerouted. Navigation systems recalibrated to avoid even accidental proximity. No cargo lines crossed human borders without explicit approval, and even then, they returned with black box protocols, recordings purged, memories sealed. Whatever Earth was doing inside its space, no one wanted to know. Yet the humans never boasted. No public statements, no proclamations of supremacy. No parades. Only continued silence. And in that void, meaning bloomed. Their restraint became myth. Their silence became legend. No one could say whether they watched the galaxy with interest or indifference. Only that they remembered. And the galaxy remembered too. In hidden corners, secret archives held restricted recordings of the Dominion's fall. Officers who viewed them did so alone, behind layers of clearance, always emerging changed. Some resigned. Others pushed for peace policies, trade initiatives, diplomatic outreach. A few disappeared entirely, requesting transfer to border worlds, away from the core. Not to escape war, but to remain unnoticed. Among humans, nothing was celebrated. No commemoration. No fanfare. The war was not something they were proud of, it was something they had endured. They did not frame it as victory. It was necessity. A correction. A cold, methodical elimination of threat. And they did not pretend it had not scarred them. Those who fought returned to civilian life with minds burdened by precision. Soldiers who had never seen the enemy face to face, only monitored pulses and confirmed terminations from thousands of kilometers away. Engineers who had built weapons too effective to ever use again. Strategists who could see patterns now in everything, patterns they could not unsee. Human education changed. Children were not taught about the war directly. But they were taught patience. Boundaries. The cost of force. They were taught not to speak first, but to finish last. And most importantly, to never forget. No species begged again. Not for war. Not from Earth. Because everyone now understood the price. And Earth never answered calls for peace, because no one dared ask.